The sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Camp Verde, Arizona, as Brooke Mallory dismounted her exhausted mare with trembling hands. The year was 1885, and she had ridden hard for 3 days straight, glancing over her shoulder at every sound, convinced that her father's men were still in pursuit. Her once fine blue traveling dress was coated with a layer of red Arizona dust, and her dark hair had partially escaped its pins, falling in wild tendrils around her face. The townspeople eyed her with suspicious curiosity as she tied her horse to the hitching post outside the saloon, her last $5 tucked securely in her boot. Inside, the air was thick with cigar smoke and whiskey fumes. Brooke hesitated at the threshold, feeling the weight of every male gaze in the establishment. This was no place for a lady, but she was desperate for information, for work, for a future far away from Boston and the powerful man who had threatened everything she cared about. "Can I help you, miss?" The barkeep's voice cut through the momentary hush that had fallen over the room. "I'm looking for work," Brooke said, her voice stronger than she felt, "and a place to stay." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd, and she felt her cheeks burn. She knew what they were thinking. What kind of work would a woman alone be seeking in a saloon? "This ain't that kind of establishment," the barkeep said, not unkindly. "Mrs. Wilson runs a boarding house 2 streets over. As for work," he shrugged. "She could try Newland's Ranch," someone called out. "Heard they lost their housekeeper last month." Brooke turned toward the voice and found herself looking into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man who had spoken was leaning against the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were dusty but well-made, and the gun at his hip looked well used. "Colton Newland," he introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "My father owns the biggest cattle ranch in the territory." There was no boast in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. "Brooke Mallory," she replied, extending her hand before she could think better of it. Colton's eyebrows rose slightly at her Eastern accent, but he took her hand. His palm was calloused against her own, his grip firm but gentle. "You're a long way from home, Miss Mallory." "That's rather the point, Mr. Newland." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Well, if you're serious about that job, I can take you out to the ranch tomorrow." "My father's a fair employer." Brooke hesitated, weighing her limited options. She needed distance, safety, and time to figure out her next move. "I'd be grateful, thank you." As she turned to leave, a commotion at the saloon doors made her freeze. 2 men in trail-worn clothes but expensive boots entered, scanning the room with predatory eyes. "We're looking for a woman," the taller one announced. "Young, dark-haired, might be going by the name Brooke Mallory." Brooke felt the blood drain from her face. How had they found her so quickly? She began to back away, but there was nowhere to go. Colton Newland's hand closed around her wrist, and he pulled her gently behind him. "There's a back door through the kitchen," he whispered. "Go now. I'll meet you at the livery stable in 10 minutes. Why would you help me?" She whispered, searching his face. "Madam, a lady in trouble is every gentleman's business in these parts," he said simply. "Now go." Brooke slipped away through the kitchen, her heart pounding. 10 minutes later, she was mounted on her exhausted mare alongside Colton Newland, riding hard away from Camp Verde and toward the sprawling landscape of his family's ranch. "Those men," Colton said when they'd put several miles between themselves and the town, "they didn't look like lawmen." "They're not," Brooke confirmed, her voice tight. "They work for my father." "And why is your father sending men after you?" Brooke hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "Because I refused to marry the man he chose for me, a man who would have destroyed everything good in me." Colton studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. "That's reason enough to run," he said simply, and urged his horse faster. The Newland Ranch sprawled across 1,000 acres of Arizona territory, nestled between rolling grasslands and the distant mountains. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. As they approached, Brooke could see various outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, the grazing cattle that formed the backbone of the Newland fortune. "My father built this place from nothing," Colton said, a note of pride in his voice. "Started with 10 head of cattle and a dream 20 years ago." "It's impressive," Brooke said sincerely, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. What would his father think of a strange woman showing up unannounced, clearly running from something? They were greeted at the door by Alina, the cook, a plump Mexican woman who clucked her tongue at Brooke's disheveled appearance and immediately offered her food. Brooke accepted gratefully, realizing she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Robert Newland, Colton's father, was a tall, imposing man with silver-streaked dark hair and the same striking blue eyes as his son. He listened to Colton's explanation about finding a new housekeeper with skepticism evident in his expression, his gaze never leaving Brooke's face. "You're running from something," he said bluntly when Colton finished. "Yes, sir," Brooke admitted. There seemed little point in denial. "The law." "No, sir. My father. He was forcing me to marry a business partner of his, a cruel man 3 times my age who has already driven one wife to an early grave." Robert Newland's expression softened slightly. "And these men in town, my father's employees. He's a powerful man in Boston. He doesn't accept being defied." The older Newland exchanged a look with his son. "We're not in the business of harboring fugitives, Miss Mallory." "I'm not asking for charity," Brooke said quickly. "I'm willing to work. I can clean, cook, mend. Can you read and write?" Robert interrupted. "Yes, sir. I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut." Robert's eyebrows rose. "A finishing school girl wants to be a ranch housekeeper." "I want to be free, Mr. Newland," Brooke said simply. "I'll do whatever honest work allows me that." Another long look passed between father and son. Finally, Robert nodded. $3 a week plus room and board. Alina will show you your duties. The first sign of trouble coming to my door because of you and you're on your way, understood?" "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." As Brooke followed Alina upstairs to a small but clean bedroom under the eaves, she caught Colton watching her, an unreadable expression on his handsome face. The first weeks at the Newland Ranch passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment. Brooke's hands, once soft from a life of privilege, grew calloused from scrubbing floors and washing laundry. Her skin tanned under the Arizona sun as she hung sheets to dry and beat rugs on the clothesline. The Eastern girl who had never made her own bed learned to manage an entire household, from planning meals with Alina to inventorying supplies for the bunkhouse where the ranch hands slept. She saw little of Colton during those first weeks. He was often out with the cattle or making business trips to neighboring towns. When their paths did cross, there was always a moment of awareness, a tension that hummed in the air between them. He was unfailingly polite, but there was a distance he maintained, as if unsure what to make of her. Robert Newland, however, seemed to warm to her presence. One evening, discovering her reading a dog-eared copy of The Scarlet Letter by lamplight, he invited her to make use of his modest library. After that, they occasionally discussed books over dinner, and he seemed to appreciate having someone with whom to share his love of literature. A month into her stay, Brooke was beating a rug on the clothesline when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Colton riding in, his horse lathered from a hard ride. The expression on his face made her drop the rug beater. "What is it?" she asked as he dismounted. "Those men from town," he said grimly. "They're asking questions in Camp Verde again. Someone mentioned seeing you ride out with me that night." Brooke felt her stomach drop. "I should leave. I don't want to bring trouble to your family." Colton shook his head. "That's not necessary, not yet anyway, but you should be careful. No trips into town for a while." "Why are you helping me?" The question had been burning in her mind for weeks. "You don't know me." Colton's blue eyes studied her face. "Maybe I'd like to," he said simply, and then, apparently embarrassed by his frankness, he tipped his hat and strode away toward the main house. That evening after dinner, Colton found her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "It's beautiful here," Brooke said as he settled into the chair beside her. "So different from Boston. Do you miss it? The city, I mean." Brooke considered the question. "I miss certain things. The libraries, the theaters, my friends." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But I don't miss the life I was expected to lead." "Tell me about him," Colton said quietly. "The man your father wanted you to marry." Brooke tensed. She hadn't spoken his name since leaving Boston. Spencer Harrington. Shipping magnate, railroad investor, twice widowed. "My father owes him money, a lot of money. This marriage was to be the payment of that debt. And you refused." "I tried to be dutiful. I agreed to meet him, to consider the match." Brooke's voice grew tight. "He took me to dinner at his club. He was charming at first. Then he began to tell me exactly how he expected me to behave as his wife. No opinions of my own, no books that might fill my head with nonsense, no friends he didn't approve of. When I expressed reservations, She swallowed hard. "He gripped my wrist under the table so hard it bruised, and he smiled the entire time, telling me how he would break any defiance out of me." Colton's jaw tightened visibly in the fading light. "And your father still expected you to marry this man." "My father said I was being dramatic. That all men discipline their wives, and that I should be grateful for the match given our financial situation." Brooke's eyes stung with unshed tears. "The night before the engagement was to be announced, I packed a bag, took my mother's jewelry, and fled. I sold the jewelry piece by piece as I made my way west." They sat in silence for a long moment, the twilight deepening around them. "You were right to run," Colton said finally. "Even if it means ruining my family. My father's business will collapse without Harrington's investment." "Your father ruined himself when he was willing to sacrifice his daughter to save his business," Colton said firmly. Brooke looked at him then, really looked at him. In the month she'd been at the ranch, she had come to respect his quiet competence, his fairness with the ranch hands, his gentleness with horses. But there was still so much she didn't know about him. "What about you?" she asked. "Have you always lived here?" A small smile played at his lips. "Born and raised, except for 4 years at a college back east." Brooke's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You went to college, Harvard, class of '79. My father may be a cattle rancher, but he believes in education." There was a hint of amusement in his voice at her obvious surprise. "Did you think I was just a cowboy, Miss Mallory?" "I didn't know what to think," she admitted. "You're not what I expected to find in Arizona territory." "And what did you expect?" "I'm not sure. Not someone who would help a stranger in trouble, not someone who would." She gestured vaguely at the ranch around them. "All of this. My father taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who can do nothing for him in return." He looked at her intently. "Though I'll admit, helping you wasn't entirely selfless." Brooke felt heat rise to her cheeks. "No, no," he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I've rather enjoyed having someone around who can discuss books more complex than dime novels." Brooke laughed, surprised and charmed. As their conversation continued into the evening, moving from books to music to childhood memories, she felt something unfurling inside her, a tentative hope that perhaps here, in this unlikely place, she might find more than just refuge. The following weeks saw a subtle shift in Brooke's relationship with Colton. Their conversations on the porch became a regular evening ritual, sometimes joined by Robert, sometimes just the two of them, talking long after the stars emerged in the vast Arizona sky. During the days, Brooke continued her work, but now there were small moments, Colton bringing her wildflowers he'd found while out riding, or stopping by the kitchen to share a cup of coffee when she was baking with Alina. One afternoon in late summer, Colton found Brooke in the garden, harvesting vegetables for dinner. "I need to ride into Phoenix tomorrow for business," he said, helping her fill her basket with ripe tomatoes. "Would you like to come along? We could visit a proper bookstore, maybe have dinner somewhere that isn't the ranch." Brooke hesitated, thinking of the men who might still be searching for her. "Is it safe? Phoenix is a big enough town that you wouldn't stand out. And it's far enough from Camp Verde that those men aren't likely to be there," he smiled. "Besides, you've been working hard. You deserve a day away." The prospect of a trip to the city, of a day spent with Colton away from the ranch and its routines, was too tempting to resist. "I'd like that," she said. The journey to Phoenix took most of the morning, but Brooke hardly noticed the time passing as she and Colton talked. He told her about his years at Harvard, about returning to the ranch with grand ideas that had to be tempered by the realities of life in the territory. She shared stories of her childhood in Boston, of the dreams she'd once had of becoming a teacher before her father's financial troubles had narrowed her options to marriage. Phoenix was a bustling town compared to Camp Verde, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and a sense of growing prosperity. After Colton concluded his business with a cattle buyer, they visited a bookstore where he insisted on buying her a copy of Whitman's Leaves of Grass. "It's too much," she protested as the shopkeeper wrapped the book. "Consider it payment for all the extra work you've been doing," Colton said. "Alina tells me you've been helping with the mending and the canning on top of your regular duties." "I don't mind the work," Brooke said honestly. "It feels good to be useful." They had dinner at the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Phoenix. Sitting across from Colton in the elegant dining room, Brooke was acutely aware of how different this dinner was from her last one with Spencer Harrington. Where Harrington had dominated the conversation, speaking of her as if she were a possession to be displayed, Colton asked her opinions and listened to her answers. Where Harrington's eyes had been cold and assessing, Colton's were warm with genuine interest. After dinner, they walked through the town, enjoying the cooler evening air. They were passing a small church when the sound of a piano drifted out, someone practicing a waltz for Sunday services. "May I have this dance, Miss Mallory?" Colton asked with a formal bow that made her laugh. "Here." "On the street? Why not? The music's fine, the night is beautiful, and so is my companion." Brooke felt her cheeks flush at the compliment. She hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I would be honored, Mr. Newland." There in the twilight, with only the stars and a distant piano as witnesses, they danced. Colton's hand was warm and steady at her waist, his steps sure as he guided her through the waltz. Brooke couldn't remember the last time she had danced, certainly not since before her father's financial troubles had forced them to withdraw from society. The simple joy of it, of moving in harmony with another person, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "What's wrong?" Colton asked, noticing. "Nothing," she said quickly. "It's just, I never thought I'd dance again. After I ran, I mean." Colton's arms tightened slightly around her. "There are many joys in life, Brooke. Dancing is just one of them. You shouldn't have to give up any of them because of one man's cruelty or another's greed. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it warmed her more than any dance could. As they rode back to the ranch the next day, a comfortable silence between them, Brooke realized with sudden clarity that she was falling in love with Colton Newland. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. What future could there be for them? She was still, technically, a fugitive. If her father or Harrington ever found her, those fears were realized sooner than she could have imagined. 3 days after their trip to Phoenix, a carriage arrived at the ranch. From the kitchen window, Brooke watched as a well-dressed man in his 50s descended, followed by 2 younger men, the same ones who had been searching for her in Camp Verde. "It's my father," she whispered, her blood running cold. Elena, who was kneading bread dough beside her, crossed herself. "Go upstairs, Nina," the cook urged. "I will tell them you are not here." But Brooke knew it was too late for such subterfuge. Her father would not have come all this way if he wasn't certain of her location. Drawing a deep breath, she straightened her spine and walked out to the porch just as Robert Newland emerged from his study to greet the visitors. "Mr. Mallory," Robert said, his voice cool but polite. "What brings you to Newland Ranch?" James Mallory was a tall, distinguished man with silver at his temples and hard eyes that matched Brooke's in color if not in warmth. His gaze fixed on his daughter with a mixture of anger and relief. "My daughter," he said simply. "I've come to take her home." "I'm not going with you, Father," Brooke said, her voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "Don't be ridiculous, Brooke. You've had your adventure. Now it's time to face your responsibilities." "My responsibilities?" Anger flared, burning away her fear. "You mean my responsibility to marry a monster so you can pay your debts?" Her father's face hardened. "Spencer is a respected businessman. Spencer is a cruel man who delights in control and fear." Brooke cut him off. "And you would have sacrificed me to him without a second thought." "You exaggerate. All marriages require adjustment, not the kind of adjustment he had in mind." Robert Newland cleared his throat. Perhaps this discussion would be better continued inside. His eyes flicked to the ranch hands who had paused in their work, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Once they were settled in the study, Brooke's father tried again. "Brooke, be reasonable. Your actions have already cost us dearly. Spencer was prepared to forgive your impulsive behavior, but his patience isn't endless." "I don't want his forgiveness," Brooke said firmly. "I want nothing to do with him." "You ungrateful child, after everything I've done for you, what have you done for her lately, Mr. Mallory?" Robert Newland's quiet question cut through James's tirade. "Other than try to sell her to pay your debts." James Mallory turned red with indignation. "This is a family matter, sir. I don't see what business it is of yours. Miss Mallory has been working on my ranch for nearly 2 months. During that time, she has proven herself to be hardworking, intelligent, and of impeccable character. That makes her welfare very much my business." The door to the study opened, and Colton entered, his expression thunderous as he took in the scene. "Elena told me we had visitors," he said, his eyes finding Brooke's immediately. James Mallory looked between his daughter and Colton, a new understanding dawning on his face. "I see," he said coldly. "You found yourself a cowboy to replace a shipping magnate. How romantic and how foolish." "That's enough," Colton said, his voice dangerously soft. "You're a guest in our home, Mr. Mallory, but my hospitality has limits." "Do you have any idea who Spencer Harrington is, young man?" James demanded. "The power he wields. He could crush your little ranch with a word." "I know exactly who Spencer Harrington is," Colton replied evenly. "Harvard class of '68, if I'm not mistaken. We attended the same alumni dinner in Boston 4 years ago. He didn't impress me then, and he impresses me even less now that I know how he treats women." James Mallory seemed taken aback by this information, reassessing Colton with narrowed eyes. "Be that as it may, Brooke is my daughter and she is coming home with me today." "No, father, I'm not," Brooke said quietly. "I'm 22 years old. You have no legal right to force me." "Then I'll cut you off without a penny. You'll have nothing." "I already have nothing from you but bad memories," Brooke replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened. "I've learned I can make my own way." James Mallory's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "You'll regret this defiance, Brooke. When you're scrubbing floors and wearing rags, you'll remember the life you threw away." "I'd rather scrub floors in freedom than live in a gilded cage with a man who sees me as property to be tamed." Her father stared at her for a long moment, then turned on his heel. "We're leaving," he snapped to his men. At the door, he paused, looking back at her one last time. "Don't come crawling back when this infatuation ends badly." The silence after his departure was profound. Brooke stood frozen, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just happened. She had severed the last tie to her old life, to her family, to everything familiar. "Are you all right?" Colton asked gently, moving to stand beside her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I've never spoken to my father that way before." "You stood your ground," Robert Newland said approvingly. "Not many would have the courage to do that." "It wasn't courage," Brooke said, finally giving in to the tears that had been threatening. "It was desperation." Colton hesitantly put an arm around her shoulders, and when she didn't pull away, he drew her closer. "Sometimes they're the same thing," he said softly. That evening, after a subdued dinner where Robert tactfully gave them space by retiring early to his room, Brooke and Colton sat on the porch swing, watching the stars emerge. "I should leave," Brooke said finally. "My father knows where I am now. He might bring more trouble." "Is that what you want, to leave?" Colton's voice was carefully neutral. Brooke closed her eyes, feeling the gentle rocking of the swing, the solid warmth of Colton beside her, the peace of the ranch at night. "No," she admitted, "but I don't want to bring problems to your door. Your father has been so kind, and you—" "I what?" She turned to look at him, gathering her courage. "You've become important to me, Colton, more important than I expected anyone to be again." His expression softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch feather-light. "You've become important to me too, Brooke. Very important. But my father was right about one thing: Spencer Harrington is a powerful man. He doesn't like to lose, and in his mind I belong to him. If he decides to pursue this—" "Let him," Colton said firmly. "Harrington may have money and connections, but so do the Newlands. My father doesn't advertise it, but our ranch is just one of several businesses he owns. We have friends in the territorial government, judges who owe us favors." He took her hands in his. "You're not alone in this fight anymore, Brooke." Looking into his earnest blue eyes, Brooke believed him. For the first time since she'd fled Boston, she felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. Not as a possession or a problem or even just a woman in trouble. For seeing me." Colton's smile was tender as he lifted one of her hands to his lips. "How could I not see you, Brooke? You shine brighter than any star in this Arizona sky." The weeks following her father's visit were marked by a deepening relationship between Brooke and Colton. They spent every moment they could together riding across the ranch lands, working side by side during cattle roundups, reading aloud to each other in the evenings. Brooke learned to shoot under Colton's patient instruction, determined never again to be defenseless. Robert Newland watched their growing attachment with a mixture of approval and concern. One evening, he found Brooke alone on the porch, watching Colton work with a young horse in the corral. "He's a good man, my son," Robert said, settling into a chair beside her. "Better than most." "I know," Brooke said softly, her eyes never leaving Colton's tall figure. "But loving him won't be easy," Robert continued. "The life of a rancher's wife is hard, especially out here, and there's always the risk that your past will catch up to you." Brooke turned to look at him then, hearing the genuine concern in his voice. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Newland, and as for my past," she shrugged, "I can't change it, I can only go forward." Robert studied her face. "You love him." It wasn't a question, but Brooke answered anyway. "Yes, more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." The older man nodded slowly. "Then I wish you both happiness. God knows you deserve it after what you've been through." 2 days later, Colton asked Brooke to ride with him to a special place he wanted to show her. They rode for an hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a small plateau overlooking the entire valley. A clear stream bubbled nearby, and wildflowers dotted the grass despite the late season. "It's beautiful," Brooke breathed, dismounting to better take in the view. "My mother loved this spot," Colton said, joining her. "She used to bring me here for picnics when I was a boy." Brooke had learned over the months that Colton's mother had died when he was 15, a loss that had shaped him profoundly. That he would bring her to this place, so rich with personal meaning, touched her deeply. "Thank you for sharing it with me," she said. Colton took her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "Brooke, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought something to the ranch, to my life, that I didn't even know was missing until you arrived." Brooke's heart began to race. "Colton, I know it hasn't been long, and I know your life has been tumultuous. If you think it's too soon, I'll understand. But I love you, Brooke Mallory, and I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" Joy bloomed inside her, bright and overwhelming. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, his kiss tender and promising. When they finally broke apart, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "It was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single pearl. "My father gave it to me after your father's visit. He said he recognized the look in my eyes when I look at you, said it was the same way he looked at my mother." As Colton slipped the ring onto her finger, Brooke felt tears of happiness spill down her cheeks. She had come west with nothing but fear and desperation. Now she had found love, family, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined. Their engagement brought a new energy to the ranch. Alina immediately began planning a feast for the wedding, while Robert Newland insisted on having proper invitations printed in Phoenix. Brooke wrote to her few remaining friends in Boston, not expecting them to make the journey but wanting them to know of her happiness. The wedding was set for October, when the weather would be mild, and the fall cattle drive completed. Brooke threw herself into preparations, sewing a wedding dress from fine muslin ordered from Phoenix, helping Alina plan the menu, and transforming the ranch house with fresh paint and new curtains she made herself. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. Brooke was in town with Alina, purchasing last-minute supplies when she saw them, Spencer, Harrington, and 4 men, dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. She pulled Alina into the shadow of a storefront. "We need to get back to the ranch," she whispered urgently. "Now." They abandoned their shopping and raced back to the ranch, Brooke's heart pounding with fear. Colton and Robert were out with the cattle, but they were expected back by nightfall. "Alina, can you ride to find them?" Brooke asked as they reached the ranch. "Tell them Harrington is in town." As Alina set off, Brooke paced the house, trying to think. What was Harrington doing in Camp Verde? Had her father sent him? Or had he come on his own, determined not to lose what he considered his property? The sound of approaching horses made her rush to the window. Her blood ran cold as she saw Spencer Harrington himself riding up to the house, flanked by two rough-looking men. There was no sign of the sheriff or any legal authority whatever Harrington planned. It wasn't official. Brooke ran to Robert's study and pulled his shotgun from the rack on the wall. Her hands trembled as she loaded it, remembering Colton's lessons. She had just positioned herself on the porch, the shotgun visible but not aimed, when the riders reached the house. "Miss Mallory," Harrington called, his cultured Boston accent incongruous in the Arizona landscape. "How lovely to see you again." Spencer Harrington was a handsome man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed even for frontier travel, with silver-streaked dark hair and cold gray eyes. Nothing about his appearance suggested the cruelty Brooke knew lurked beneath the polished exterior. "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged, keeping her voice steady. "This is private property. You're not welcome here." Harrington smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Now, is that any way to greet your fiancé?" "You were never my fiancé, Mr. Harrington. And I'm engaged to be married to another man in 2 weeks' time." Something dark flashed across Harrington's face before his smile returned, tighter now. "I see. Well, that is a complication. Your father will be most disappointed." "My father has no say in my life anymore." "Perhaps not," Harrington conceded, dismounting despite her implicit warning to stay away. "But I've come a very long way to find you, Brooke. I don't intend to leave empty-handed. I'm not a package to be collected, Mr. Harrington." Brooke raised the shotgun slightly, making her intent clear. "Please leave." Harrington's eyes narrowed at the weapon. "You won't shoot me, Brooke. You don't have it in you." "You're wrong," she said, her voice cold. "I've learned a great many things since leaving Boston. How to protect myself is one of them." For a tense moment, they stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Then, the sound of approaching riders broke the standoff. Colton and Robert galloped into the yard, followed by Alina and 2 ranch hands. They pulled up sharply at the scene before them. "What's going on here?" Robert demanded, dismounting with surprising agility for a man his age. "Mr. Newland, I presume," Harrington said smoothly. "I'm Spencer Harrington of Boston. I've come to discuss Miss Mallory's situation." "Miss Mallory's situation is quite clear," Robert replied. "She's engaged to my son and under my protection." Colton had moved to Brooke's side, his hand gently lowering the shotgun she still held. "Are you all right?" he murmured. "Yes," she whispered back, "but he won't give up easily." "Mr. Newland," Harrington continued, "I understand your attachment to Miss Mallory. She's a charming young woman, but there are financial and legal matters at stake that you may not be aware of." "If you're referring to James Mallory's debts to you, we're well aware," Robert said coldly. "But Brooke is not collateral for those debts." Harrington's pleasant mask slipped further. "Mr. Mallory promised his daughter's hand in marriage. We had an agreement that didn't involve my consent," Brooke interrupted. "Your father speaks for you legally." "Not anymore," Colton said firmly. "Brooke is a grown woman making her own choices, and she's chosen to stay here with me." Harrington's cold gaze shifted to Colton, assessing him with obvious disdain. "Young man, you have no idea who you're dealing with. I could buy this entire territory if I wanted to." "But you can't buy Brooke," Colton replied evenly. "And that's eating at you, isn't it? The one thing your money can't obtain." Something ugly twisted Harrington's features. "You think this is about money? This is about honor, about agreements made between gentlemen." "There's nothing gentlemanly about forcing a woman to marry against her will," Robert Newland said, his hand moving to rest on his holstered pistol. "Now, Mr. Harrington, I'll ask you once to leave my property peacefully." "Or what?" Harrington sneered. "You'll shoot me." "A prominent businessman from Boston, if necessary," Robert said calmly. but I was thinking more along the lines of having Sheriff Davis arrest you for trespassing. He's quite clear on property rights in this territory." The two men with Harrington shifted uncomfortably, clearly not having signed up for a confrontation with armed ranchers and the law. Harrington noticed their unease and scowled. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low with menace as he remounted his horse. "Your little ranch won't protect you forever, Miss Mallory, and you," he addressed Colton, "you'll find that taking what's mine comes with consequences." "She was never yours," Colton said quietly. "That's what you can't accept." Harrington's face contorted with rage, but with a final glare he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following. That evening, after a tense dinner where no one had much appetite, Brooke found Colton on the porch, staring out at the darkening landscape. "He'll be back," she said softly, joining him at the railing. "I know." "I've brought nothing but trouble to your door, Colton. Maybe we should postpone the wedding, give him time to know." Colton turned to face her, his expression fierce. "We are not letting that man dictate our lives." "The wedding happens as planned." Brooke searched his face. "Are you sure? He meant what he said about consequences. He has connections, money, and we have each other, my father, this land, and the law on our side." Colton took her hands in his. "I know you're scared, Brooke. But running or hiding won't solve this. We face him together, head on. What if he tries to hurt you? Or your father? I couldn't bear it if something happened to either of you because of me. Nothing is going to happen to us." Colton's voice was firm with conviction. "But we'll take precautions. Extra men watching the ranch, someone with you at all times when you go to town." Brooke bit her lip, still uncertain. Colton lifted her chin gently, making her meet his eyes. "Brooke, when you came into my life, you changed everything. I'm not giving you up because some rich Easterner thinks he can buy whatever he wants." "I love you," she whispered, leaning into his strength. "I love you too," he said, wrapping his arms around her. "And in 2 weeks, you'll be my wife." Harrington and all his money can't change that. The next 2 weeks passed in a heightened state of vigilance. Robert Newland spoke to Sheriff Davis, who promised to keep an eye on Harrington and his men while they remained in the area. Brooke was never left alone, with either Colton, Alina, or one of the trusted ranch hands always nearby. Despite the tension, wedding preparations continued. Friends and neighbors from surrounding ranches confirmed their attendance, and Alina outdid herself preparing food for the celebration. Brooke's wedding dress was finished, a simple but elegant gown that made her feel beautiful when she tried it on. The day before the wedding, Brooke was helping Alina in the garden when a carriage arrived. Her heart clenched with fear until she saw the occupant not Harrington, but a woman about her own age dressed in an elegant traveling outfit. "Brooke Mallory," the woman called, peering around uncertainly. "Clara," Brooke gasped, recognizing one of her dearest friends from Boston. "Clara Whitney," the women embraced, both talking at once in their excitement. Clara had received Brooke's letter about the wedding and, against her parents' wishes, had made the journey west to support her friend. "I couldn't let you marry without at least one person from home," Clara explained as they settled in the parlor with tea. "Though I must say, now that I've seen your Cowboy, I completely understand why you chose him over Harrington." Brooke laughed, feeling lighter than she had in days. "Colton is everything Harrington is not: kind, honest, respectful. And devastatingly handsome," Clara added with a grin. "Your father is beside himself, you know, the scandal of his daughter running off to marry a cattleman." "I can imagine," Brooke said dryly. "But I stopped caring about what my father thinks the day he tried to sell me to Harrington." Clara's expression sobered. "Is it true what they say about him? Harrington, I mean, that his second wife fell down the stairs?" Brooke nodded grimly. after he pushed her, according to their housekeeper. But no one would testify against a man of his standing, of course. Well, I'm glad you escaped. Clara reached over to squeeze Brooke's hand. And I'm even happier that you found someone worthy of you. Having Clara there was a balm to Brooke's spirit. They spent the afternoon reminiscing and preparing for the wedding, Clara helping with the final decorations for the ceremony that would take place in the ranch's front yard. That evening, the Newlands hosted a small dinner to welcome Clara and to celebrate the eve of the wedding. The mood was festive, with even Robert Newland relaxing enough to share stories of Colton's childhood escapades that had Brooke laughing until tears came to her eyes. As they were finishing dessert, the sound of horses approaching made everyone tense. Colton went to the window, his hand automatically moving to his gun. "Sheriff Davis," he reported, relief evident in his voice. "And it looks like he's alone." The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, declined refreshments and got straight to the point. "Thought you should know. Harrington and his men left town this afternoon," he said. "Headed east, according to the station master." Brooke felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "They're gone, seems that way," the sheriff confirmed. "Though I wouldn't let your guard down completely. Men like that don't take kindly to defeat." "We'll stay vigilant," Robert assured him, "but this is good news on the eve of the wedding." After the sheriff departed, the mood in the house was noticeably lighter. Clara retired to the guest room while Alina and Robert said their goodnights, leaving Brooke and Colton alone in the parlor. "You think it's really over?" Brooke asked, still hardly daring to hope. "I think Harrington realized he couldn't win. Not here on our ground," Colton said, drawing her into his arms. "He's the type who only fights when victory is assured." Brooke rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Tomorrow, I'll be your wife," she murmured, the words filling her with quiet joy. "And I'll be the luckiest man in the Arizona Territory," Colton replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the October air crisp but not cold, the sky an endless blue overhead. The ranch had been transformed with wildflowers, ribbons, and lanterns that would be lit as evening fell. Guests began arriving mid-morning, neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople from Camp Verde, even a few of Colton's college friends who had made the journey from the east. In the bedroom that had become hers, Brooke prepared with Clara and Alina's help. Her wedding dress, simple but elegant, fit perfectly. Clara arranged her hair with wildflowers instead of a veil, while Alina supplied the something borrowed a delicate lace handkerchief that had been her own mother's. A knock at the door revealed Robert Newland, dressed in his finest suit, his silver hair neatly combed. "May I speak with Brooke for a moment?" he asked. Once they were alone, Robert cleared his throat, seeming uncharacteristically emotional. "I wanted to give you this," he said, holding out a small velvet box. "It belonged to my wife, Colton's mother. She would have wanted you to have it." Inside the box was a gold necklace with a small diamond pendant. "It's beautiful," Brooke breathed. "Catherine would have loved you," Robert said gruffly as he helped her fasten the necklace. "She always wanted a daughter." Brooke felt tears threatening. "Thank you for accepting me into your family, for everything you've done." Robert waved away her thanks. "You've brought life back to this ranch, back to my son. That's worth more than anything." He offered his arm. "Now, if you'll allow me, I'd be honored to walk you to your groom." Outside, the gathered guests stood as Brooke appeared on Robert's arm. But Brooke had eyes only for Colton, waiting for her beneath an arch of autumn flowers. His face, as he watched her approach, held such love and wonder that she felt her heart might burst with happiness. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promises of love, respect, and partnership that brought tears to many eyes. When Colton kissed her as husband and wife, the cheers of their friends and family echoed across the ranch lands. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. As the evening wore on, Brooke found herself standing slightly apart, watching her new husband laugh with his friends, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in the span of a few months. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Newland," Colton said, coming to join her with 2 glasses of champagne. "Mrs. Newland," Brooke repeated, tasting the name. "I like the sound of that, so do I." He handed her a glass and clinked his against it. To us, she echoed, taking a sip. "I was just thinking about how different everything is from what I expected when I left Boston. I was so frightened, so alone. And now I have everything I never dared to dream of." She looked up at him, her heart full. "A home, a family, a husband I love more than I thought possible." Colton's expression softened as he tucked a stray flower back into her hair. "When you first walked into that saloon in Camp Verde, covered in dust, but standing so tall, I knew you were special. I just had no idea how completely you would change my life." They rejoined the celebration, dancing and laughing with their guests until the last lantern burned low. As they prepared to leave for their wedding night to be spent in a specially prepared cabin on a distant part of the ranch, Clara pulled Brooke aside for a final embrace. "I've never seen you so happy," her friend whispered. "He's a good man, Brooke." "The best," Brooke agreed, her eyes finding Colton across the yard. As they rode away in the moonlight, the sounds of celebration fading behind them, Brooke felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever the future held, running the ranch, starting a family, perhaps even one day reconciling with her father, she would face it with Colton by her side. The cabin, when they reached it, was a picture of rustic romance. Lanterns illuminated the interior, casting a golden glow over the simple but comfortable furnishings. A fire crackled in the hearth, warding off the October night's chill. Colton lifted Brooke from her horse and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, he set her gently on her feet, suddenly serious as he looked down at her. "I love you, Brooke Newland," he said softly. "I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You gave me back my life, my future, my hope. You gave me purpose," he countered, turning his face to kiss her palm. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to truly live, to fight for something that matters." As he bent to kiss her, Brooke felt the last vestiges of her past fall away. Here, in this cabin, in this moment, her new life was beginning, a life of her own choosing, with a man who saw her not as property or a prize, but as a partner, an equal, and a beloved wife. 5 years later, the Newland Ranch had prospered in the years since Brooke and Colton's marriage. Under their joint management, they had expanded the cattle operation, built a new bunkhouse for the growing number of ranch hands, and even opened a small school for the children of the workers and neighboring farms. Brooke stood on the porch of the main house, watching as Colton rode in from checking the north pasture. Their 3-year-old son, Robert James Newland, named for both grandfathers, squirmed in her arms, eager to greet his father. "Papa," the boy shouted as Colton dismounted. "There's my boy," Colton laughed, swinging the child up onto his shoulders. Brooke smiled, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. The doctor in Phoenix had suggested it might be twins this time, a prospect that both excited and terrified her. "How are you feeling?" Colton asked, bending to kiss her after setting their son down to play with his wooden horses. "Enormous," Brooke replied dryly. "But well." "You're beautiful," he insisted, his blue eyes still holding the same adoration they had on their wedding day. Life wasn't perfect, the work was hard. The Arizona summers brutally hot, the winters surprisingly cold. But it was a good life, a life they had built together through love and determination. The sound of an approaching carriage drew their attention. Visitors were common enough at the ranch now, especially with the school bringing families from miles around, but something about this particular carriage made Brooke's heart skip a beat. "Is that?" Colton began, his arm tightening around her waist. "My father," Brooke confirmed as the carriage drew closer. They hadn't seen James Mallory since that confrontation before their wedding. Brooke had written to him when Robert was born, extending an olive branch, but had received only a terse congratulatory note in return. "Do you want me to send him away?" Colton asked, his expression serious. Brooke considered the question, watching as the carriage stopped and her father, looking older and somehow smaller than she remembered, descended carefully. "No," she decided. "It's time we made peace if that's what he's here for." Little Robert, curious about the newcomer, ran to hide behind his mother's skirts as James Mallory approached the porch. The older man's eyes widened at the sight of his grandson. "Brooke," he said formally, removing his hat. "Colton. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion." "Father," Brooke acknowledged. "This is a surprise." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when little Robert tugged at Brooke's dress and whispered loudly, "Who's that, Mama?" Brooke bent awkwardly, her pregnant belly making it difficult. "This is your grandfather, Robert. Can you say hello?" The boy regarded James solemnly for a moment before offering a shy wave. Something in James Mallory's stern face softened. "He has your eyes," he said to Brooke, "and his father's spirit," she replied. "Would you like to come inside, Father? It's nearly time for tea." In the parlor, over Alina's excellent tea and biscuits, the initial awkwardness slowly began to thaw. James explained that he had sold his business in Boston and retired to Phoenix for his health, on his doctor's recommendation. "The dry air is supposed to be good for my lungs," he said, "and I thought, being so much closer." He trailed off, uncharacteristically uncertain. "You thought you might meet your grandson," Colton suggested gently. James nodded, his eyes on the boy who was now showing off his collection of carved wooden animals. "And make amends if possible. I've had a lot of time to think these past years." Brooke felt a complicated mix of emotions: residual anger, certainly, but also a surprising sympathy for this aging man who had lost so much to his own pride. "Spencer Harrington was ruined last year," James said abruptly. "His shipping company collapsed after a scandal: mistreatment of sailors, embezzlement, some other unsavory business. He's facing prison." "I'm sorry for his victims," Brooke said honestly, "but not sorry that he can't hurt anyone else." James nodded slowly. "You were right about him. I was. Blinded by my financial troubles, by my own ambition. I didn't want to see what kind of man he truly was." He looked up at her, his eyes pained. "Can you ever forgive me for that, Brooke? For being willing to sacrifice your happiness, your very safety, for my own gain?" Brooke felt Colton's hand find hers, offering silent support. "I've made peace with the past, Father," she said carefully. "I had to build this life." She looked around at the home she and Colton had created, at their son playing contentedly on the rug. "And it's a good life, better than anything I could have had in Boston." "I can see that," James said, something like wonder in his voice. "You've thrived here against all odds." "With help," Brooke acknowledged, squeezing Colton's hand. "I wasn't alone." "No, you weren't," James agreed, his gaze moving to Colton. "I misjudged you, son. I thought you were taking advantage of a vulnerable young woman. I see now that you were saving her from Harrington, yes, but perhaps also from the life I would have condemned her to. I wasn't trying to save anyone, Colton said honestly. I just knew I'd found someone extraordinary, someone I couldn't let go. As the afternoon progressed, some of the tension eased. James asked about the ranch, about their lives, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. He delighted in his grandson's antics and offered congratulations on the coming addition to their family. When it was time for him to leave, he was staying in Camp Verde and would return to Phoenix. The following day, he hesitated at the door. "I'd like to visit again if that would be acceptable," he said. "Perhaps more regularly now that I'm in Arizona." Brooke exchanged a look with Colton, who nodded slightly. "We'd like that, Father," she said. "Robert should know his grandfather." "And the new babies too," James added, his eyes falling to her pregnant belly. "Twins, you said." "The doctor thinks so, but we won't know for certain until they arrive." James nodded, something like regret passing across his features. "Your mother would have been so proud of you, Brooke. She always had more courage than I gave her credit for." He looked at Colton. "Take care of them." "With my life," Colton promised. As they watched the carriage disappear down the drive, Colton wrapped his arms around Brooke from behind, his hands resting protectively over their unborn children. "Are you all right?" he murmured against her hair. "I think so," she said, leaning back against his strength. "I never expected to see him again, let alone to hear him apologize. People can change." "Some people," Brooke agreed, "when they're brave enough to face their mistakes." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "I meant what I said to my father. This life, our life, is better than anything I could have imagined back in Boston. Even with all the hardships, the droughts, the hard winters, the endless work, even with all of that," she confirmed. "Because through all of it, we've faced everything together, as partners, as equals." Colton's expression softened as he placed a gentle hand on her cheek. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the saloon when I helped you escape those men?" "I asked why you would help me," Brooke recalled. "And you said a lady in trouble was every gentleman's business." Colton shook his head, smiling. "Not that. Later, before we left for the ranch, you whispered that Harrington had said you'd ruin him. And you said, 'Then let me be ruined with you,'" Brooke finished, the memory clear despite the years that had passed. "Best decision I ever made," Colton said, bending to kiss her. "Being ruined with you has been the greatest joy of my life." As the sun set over the Arizona landscape, they both loved, casting long shadows across the ranch they had built together. Brooke thought of how far she had come from that desperate young woman who had fled Boston with nothing but fear and determination. She had found not just safety, but love, purpose, and a future brighter than she had ever dared to hope for. That evening, after putting Robert to bed with stories of brave cowboys and wild horses, Brooke and Colton sat on their porch swing, a tradition they had maintained through 5 years of marriage. The lanterns cast a golden glow over the yard, and in the distance, the soft lowing of cattle blended with the chirping of crickets in a familiar lullaby. "What are you thinking about?" Colton asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "The day we met," Brooke replied, smiling at the memory. "How terrified I was, how certain that my life was over, and yet it was just beginning." "You looked so out of place in that saloon," Colton chuckled. "Like a rose in a patch of weeds." "A very dusty, travel-worn rose," Brooke amended. "Still the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." He brushed a kiss against her temple. "I knew, even then, that my life had changed the moment you walked through that door. Even though I brought nothing but trouble to your door," she teased, echoing words she had once spoken in genuine distress. "The best kind of trouble," he assured her. "The kind worth fighting for." As they rocked gently in the cool evening air, Brooke felt a profound contentment. Her journey from Boston to Arizona had been one of desperation, but it had led her to this moment, this life, this love. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring the imminent arrival of their twins, the complexities of a tentative reconciliation with her father, the ever-present demands of ranch life, they would face them together, just as they had faced everything else. "I love you, Colton Newland," she whispered, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I love you, Brooke Newland," he replied, his voice warm with the depth of his feeling. "Today, tomorrow, and every day for the rest of our lives." In the soft Arizona night, surrounded by the home and family they had created together, Brooke knew that she had found what every person seeks. Not just love, but a love worth risking everything for, a love that, rather than ruining them, had made them both more complete than they could ever have been apart.